Welcome to my channel Java Fun Day. Here we will discuss different concepts of the Java programming language, and also we will try to implement it so that you can clearly understand these concepts. Now the today's topic is exceptions. Now let's see what is exception. Exception is nothing but any unwanted or any unexpected event that occurs during your program's execution, and this event disrupts your flow of execution. Now, to understand this more clearly, let's take an example. Suppose you have written a program which divides number A by number B, and number A and number B are the inputs from the user. So what will happen if number A is, let's say, 10 and user gives number B as a 0? You cannot divide number 10 by number 0. It's not possible, right? So that's when suppose your program tries to execute this mathematical logic, that's divide number 10 by 0, there will be exception raised because that's an unexpected event. So this scenario we call exceptions. Now let's see there are what type of exceptions we have, and how to create our own exception class, because Java has already predefined exceptions like arithmetic exception, file not found exception kind of thing we already have, but we it is also possible for you to create your own exception. So let's see first what are the different type of exceptions we have. So we can categorize the exception into basically two different categories. First one is a checked exception. Let's see what is checked exception. Checked exception are those type of exceptions which are checked at compile time. That means suppose you are throwing an exception, then compiler will immediately during compilation of program will check whether your method is throwing an exception. If it is throwing an exception, it asks you to handle that exception. So this is during compilation only. So we are not yet entered into a runtime phase. That means your application is not yet running. So this is a checked exception. What is the second type? Second type of exception is unchecked exception. So by name it says it is not checked. That means it is not checked during compile time. So compiler will not check whether you are throwing an exception or not. So during runtime, if that event occurs, then exception will be raised. So this is unchecked exception. You will clearly understand this when we actually implement or create an exception class, which is checked exception, and try to throw it from a program, and then you will understand how the compiler behaves, and same for the unchecked exception. So if you understood this, let's go to our Eclipse and create a very simple program which to use our checked exception and unchecked exception using our own custom exception class. So you will understand the both concept, how you to create your own exception class and how the checked exception and unchecked exception also behaves. So let's jump to our Eclipse and write a small program to understand these concepts. Now let's go ahead and create our simple core Java project. I have my Eclipse workspace open. I'll create a simple my test project. I'm using Java 8. You can use any available JDK version that you want to use. Let's create. Now this is a src folder. That's it. This is a source folder. I'll keep it as is to make it a simple. Now we have this project created. Now let's add some source here. So I'll create a package. Let's say it's a com.javafunday.exceptions. Okay, let's keep it as an exception package. I will create a new class. Okay, this is test exceptions, right? Okay, I need a public static void main, so I click here. If you want to generate comments for the class, it's predefined. Some comments will be generated. If you want to add, you do it, but I will keep it as is. So this is a public class. Finish. So I have this now class created with auto generated stuff. Fine. Now what I want to do is I want to execute a program which will throw an exception. Okay, so what I will do, I will write a method here. Okay, private int calculate, right? So my calculate method will take two arguments, int integer first and integer second. Okay, and now there is error because it needs a return statement. Let's add some return. We'll change it. Now my condition will be if first, okay, the first number, if it is less than 0, I need to throw an exception. Okay, so we'll check which exception we need to throw, but I will just create a method stub here like a throw exception. Okay, and else I will return first plus second. So this is my return statement. Let us format this. Now I need to call this method from here. So calculate, okay, and let's pass some value as 0 and 1. Now it will not allow you because this is a static method and this is an instance method. So we create it as a static. Now we are able to call it. So if it is less than 0, I will get exception. Now which type of exception I need to throw? Let me create another package. So I have exception types. Okay, I will create a new exception class here. So let's say we need to raise a compile time exception. So I create a compile exception class. Now in order to make this class as exception, we need to extend it by exception class. When you extend it by exception class, it will become a compile time exception. And to pass the code, maybe what I will do, I will call a super method from constructor. Let's create a constructor. Now this is a constructor. Let's call it super method with whatever the code we are going past here. So this is my exception class, right? It needs a serial version UID. Okay, that's fine. So we have a compile time exception. Now to throw this exception, I will write a throw new compile exception. I need a code here. So code is, let's say, negative. So value is negative. Now if you see, I'm throwing a compile time exception here. So compiler is giving me a warning. We need this exception to be handled. So that's the compile time exception. That means we need to handle it in a code. So what are the options we have? We need to add a throws clause here. Okay, so let's add a throws. So it becomes a throws compile exception. So now compiler knows that this method is going to throw. Now this exception will propagate to the parent. So what is the parent of calculate? It becomes it's a main method. So main method also now showing a compile time error that your method is calling something and it's throwing an exception. It might throw exception and we need to handle it. So there are two options: add throws declaration and surround with a try catch block. So let's surround with I mean we can throw also from here. It will exit the program, and if we can do like this, so this is a try catch block, and so whenever exception is thrown, it will be cached here, and whatever the operation we are writing here will get executed only if exception is raised. So let's execute this program and let's see what happens. um, Again, if okay, let's add a sysout here. So with that we can see the returned value as well. Okay, I will format it. Okay, now to run this, let's just run as Java application. So it returned 1. So that's 0 plus 1, 1. Now if I give this value as a negative, that's minus 1, it should throw an compile time exception. And when exception is thrown from here, it should print the stack trace, okay, on the console. Let's again run as a Java application. See, now we have this exception thrown. Code is printed as a negative, and we have stack trace that it occurred on test exception class line number 19. That's it's thrown from here. Okay, so this is a compile time exception. Now what if suppose we have a business scenario where this method is called from many places, okay, and you are modifying this method, and one part of this modification might throw an exception if something happens, like say value is something else or user not present or kind of thing. So in this case we cannot throw compile time exception because, as I said, this method is called from say 5 classes. Okay, because this is a common method, and it let's say it is a utility method, and if it is called from 5 places, we need to add this try and catch and handle everything into 5 places, right? So instead of that, what we can do is we can write a runtime exception. That means compiler will not force us to handle this from every parent of this method. Okay, so we can handle it at central or and the topmost parent caller of this method. So let's create a new class which is runtime exception. Okay, so let's create a runtime exception test, because runtime exception is a keyword as well, so we cannot use it. So I will create a runtime exception test. Okay, finish. Now here I need to extend a runtime exception class, right? So now this becomes my runtime exception. It's a unchecked exception. So similarly, I'll create a constructor. Now here we have, let's say we are getting a code and we need to pass it to the super, and we'll add a serial version UID. So this is my runtime exception class. So let's see what happens. Let's go to our original class, that is test exception. Okay, now what I will do is I will create a copy of this runtime. Okay, and I remove everything that we did before for compile time exception. So this is not. Okay, now here again we are now back to the original setting. Now here we need to throw in runtime exception. So let's say throw new. Again our class is runtime exception test. That's our class, and we need to pass a code. Let's say it's negative runtime. Right, now see the difference. Now we are throwing a runtime exception, we don't get a compile time warning that we need to throw this like we got in the compile exception time. Also there is no need to handle it here, right? So let's see what happens when we execute this. See, now we have exception in thread main. It gave us our runtime exception class, and it's thrown at line number 15 here. Okay, so now this is how runtime and compile time exception works. If you want to handle this, again, it's not like we cannot use a try catch block. It's possible. Let's see how it will work. I will surround this line with a try and catch block, and let's catch a runtime exception here. Okay, that is thrown from here. And what I want to use here is e.get message plus this is runtime exception. Okay, so we are not printing a stack trace. I mean, there's a we should print a stack trace, but just for a demo purpose, I'm not printing stack trace so that you know that this exception is really been caught here and we have a different message. So let's execute here. See, now we have this sysout. That means exception was thrown, it got caught here, and then this message was printed. Again, if you see runtime exception extends our runtime exception, so we can also do it like this. It is not a standard practice to catch a generic exception. Okay, so you should usually catch that exception that is we have thrown. See, again, it is getting caught because it is a parent for this class. So friends, this is all about how the exceptions, that is compile time exceptions and runtime exception works and how they are different from one another. To summarize, compile exception makes us to handle this exception at compile time. I mean, you need to add a throws clause to the method, and you need to handle this exception using try catch block in the parent, or either write a throws clause as well on the parent so that it will be thrown from the main thread. And for runtime exception, it's not mandatory to add a throws clause, and also it is not required to add a try catch block. Compiler will not show any error during compilation. So that's all for this session. We'll have a next session on some different topic. Let me know how this session was, and